Hi, I'm Nina Bosky, and welcome to Life Bites, where each and every week we'll get you inspired in the areas of life, business, and media. We'll help you dare, dream, do, and be so you can get out of your head into your soul in order to tune in and take a bite. This week, we're getting you life inspired. Hi, Mark. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nina. A real pleasure to be here. I'm honored. Thank you so much.
Well, when I think about life inspired, I think of you. And I think you and what I've seen you do over the last year or so, be able to confront such huge issues in your own life, in your family's life, but to be an inspiration for all of us. So tell us a little bit about your journey so they can hear it from you and your words and your heart of what happened and how this all came about.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you very much. It was approximately almost literally a year ago, July of 2021, that I was diagnosed with what my urologist called stage 4 aggressive growth prostate cancer that had already metastasized to my bones. So it was, the horse was out of the barn. If it's in the prostate, there's a variety of things they can do. Once it's out of the prostate, there are very few options. So that was, and I knew in the spring that something was wrong. I had some like pre-testing that was done that indicated there were issues with the prostate. I was approaching 60 years old, but the biopsy in July was the official confirmation that it was, as bad as it gets, frankly. I was married at that point. My wife, her name was Suzanne Gracie. We had been married for 10 years. I knew her for 15. Last year was our 10-year anniversary. So she was my, of course, caretaker in every sense of the word, literally, figuratively, spiritually, certainly, faith-wise, big time. You see the images perhaps around me here. This is the chair she sat in every day when we'd have our meals together. Tragically, several months later, early October 2021, several months into my diagnosis, she goes to the same local hospital that I was diagnosed in. I could still picture her leaving the house that morning. She went for what she thought was a gallbladder issue. She was having some pain and symptoms that were characteristic of a gallbladder acting up, and she was almost certain she was going to have gallbladder surgery. So a number of hours go by, and I'm getting nervous. I haven't heard from her. Then I get a text from her son, Henry Gracie, saying, "Hey, Mark, can I come over and speak with you?" And I'm thinking that can't be good news. So of course I called her immediately, and somehow I got her on the phone, and they literally already had her on painkillers, on opioids. They had diagnosed, they did scans of her, and what it revealed, it wasn't her gallbladder, which would have been best case. It was worst case. It was liver cancer. She had a giant tumor that was compromising approximately 3/4 of her liver. So this was devastating. And I have to say, and again, representative of the images you see around me here, in that very discussion, I'm trying to take this in and just comprehend what's happening. Here I have life-threatening, truly cancer. All of a sudden, she appears to have a cancer significantly worse than mine, and she's in pain, profound pain. So as I'm trying to distill all that, I myself, from my own cancer journey, she and I had already made the decision at that point. I wasn't going to go a conventional route. I wasn't going to do the high-dose hormone therapy and the chemotherapy, the high-dose chemotherapy that are presented as the only treatments for a person in my situation. I chose to do none of that because I'd done my homework. I had a long history in my family, especially with my mom 32 years ago, who had breast cancer that became bone cancer, and she died from the chemotherapy. I know that. It always stayed up here. It always stuck with me. So I had determined I wasn't going to go a conventional route. I was going to go alternative, and I was in the midst of exploring what that alternative path might look like, what was out there, et cetera. So now she's got liver cancer. So she spent a little, and on that first call, it was so, I refer to that call as being soul crushing. It was a soul.
Yeah.
Hearing that from her, and I'm a fighter, right? You know me personally for many years. Born in the Bronx, New York boy, carved out a career from very little. I'm a fighter. So I wanted to hear fight in her. But on the call, the very first thing she said, and the last thing she ultimately said to me, she said, "It's in God's hands."
Mm.
She immediately went there. And thank God she did. She was right. It was in God's hands. Her situation, all of our situations are in God's hands. Hers especially was at that point in time. So it's the very, very first thing she said to me. And what happened was thereafter, we were seeking out now treatment options for her, given that hers was much more immediately life-threatening and painful than mine was. And again, the only solution available, there was some hope. Some of the doctors we spoke to that they could use chemotherapy to shrink the liver tumor sufficiently where it would become operable.
Mm-hmm.
And again, with our knowledge of chemotherapy and as compromised as her body already was, that just wasn't in the cards. She knew it. I knew it. And then what happened was on my alternative healing journey, and this is part of the miracle that's happening in my life right now, through some family connections. My wife is, was part of the famous Gracie Jiu-Jitsu family, that started the Ultimate Fighting Championship and created mixed martial arts for all intents and purposes. So they have a worldwide audience. So a couple of her sons put a query out on social media soliciting, alternative treatment centers. Does anybody know about more natural, holistic, alternative, non-toxic ways of treating cancer? They got hundreds of responses back, and the preponderance of responses they got were about a clinic in Tijuana, Mexico, of all places, called CHIPSA, CHIPSA, CHIPSA Hospital. And at first, it's hard to believe that, I lived my whole life in New York and now LA, right? Wealthiest, most powerful nation in the history of the world. This stuff exists in Tijuana, but it doesn't exist in Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco. I dug in. I spoke to the folks at CHIPSA Hospital at length. I spoke to them literally hours at a time, including their doctors, and it was true. I found out they had under one roof in this building in Tijuana a variety of advanced immunotherapy treatments, coupled with some conventional treatments, but leading edge breakthrough immunotherapy that largely is unavailable to us here in the United States. So immediately my brain was working. I have to get down there and bring my wife down there, right? Perhaps they can treat both of us. And they confirmed that her case would be much tougher, but they would take it on. Sadly, what happened was she declined incredibly rapidly, literally incredibly rapidly. Her body just broke down, and we made the determination, and I'm glad her kids talked me down from the idea of taking Suzanne to Mexico, because she wouldn't have been up to it. She died within 8 weeks. She died on December 12th. Yeah, yeah, it was literally approximately 8 weeks after diagnosis.
That is, I mean, what a year this has been when you think about it, Mark. And I'm sure there's the physicality of what you're dealing with, and then there's the extreme emotion, and it's one hit after another. And so when you initially found out, it sounds like you went into fight mode, and yet you were able to, because sometimes people don't get out of the fight, they fight to the bitter end instead of surrendering to what she said, which was, it's in God's hands. And so sometimes it's hard to know, do I fight or do I surrender? I mean, that how did you guys deal with that element, with two different emotions kind of coming into, what do we do here?
Yeah, that definitely is the operative question. It's been absolutely central to what is my healing process, to redirect. And me, I was a career market researcher. We worked with numbers and quantification and material and what we could measure. We didn't work with spiritual. We didn't work with, right. So I really, painfully so, and with a great deal of assistance from a variety of different resources, and most profoundly, what you see around me, the spiritual basis, the faith basis of it. And I kid you not, when I first got my cancer diagnosis, there were three things I did immediately. One was we changed my diet virtually overnight, literally. It was not easy, right?
So what's your diet now? Like, tell me
It's
what when you changed it, because I think for some people, they think health, and just because you see organic on a package could be just, as you know, we come from the marketing world. This could be just slick marketing because it's the buzzword. You know what I mean? It's all natural, right?
yes, right,
So,
exactly.
so what do you mean by change your diet? What happened?
I largely changed to a vegan diet,
Okay.
very heavily plant-based, as natural can be, as organic could be, and heavy juicing, fresh, nutritionally dense juicing aggressively every single day. So,
Okay.
so it was a movement to veganism in large part, non-dairy, non-animal, no meat in there. So my diet, although I do include chicken in there and certain types of fish in there as well, and occasionally, rare occasions, eggs are in there. Aside from that, it's all plant-based, vegan, and very heavily juicing. And I did that virtually overnight. And partly my wife's family had eaten that way for many years. There's a diet in their family called the Gracie diet that already had embraced a lot of those principles. So that's one thing I did. The second thing I did was, you know me, I'm a prolific reader. I'm always reading 3 to 4, 5 books at a time, right? The one book I had never read was the Bible.
Wow.
Right, literally. So the second thing I did, or perhaps the first thing, I started with the New Testament at my wife's request, and then I went back to the Old Testament. I read the whole 1,400 pages or so of the Bible, and with Suzanne's influence, and this is before she got her own diagnosis. With Suzanne was deeply steeped in faith, on a level I used to wonder where it came from, frankly. And she actually told me at one point she used to love the television show The Flying Nun with Sally Field. Mm-hmm. And remember, Sister Bertrill had Suzanne went to a Catholic school where the nuns wore that. And she so admired the nuns, she actually considered when she was a girl what it would be like to be a nun. So she, at a seemingly early age, she had that within her. And Nina, the 15 years I knew her, the bulk of those 15 years, she was on what we called a faith walk, a faith journey. And I went with her on that. I went with her. She had an awareness and what I'll call a receptivity that I didn't think I'd ever be able to achieve. And we don't have the time to go into them. There are so many examples I had. Let me give one example though, because it relates very closely to the journey here. We went so far along this faith walk that we did several religious, spiritual pilgrimages together. One of them was to Mexico City, and we went and visited the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is it's a Marian, it's Mexican version of Marian apparitions. We actually saw the cloak. The peasant Juan Diego was wearing a cloak when he had the Marian apparition, and she told him to collect the wildflowers, put them in the cloak, then go to the bishop and show him the wildflowers. So he did that. He gets in front of the bishop, he opens the cloak, the wildflowers fall out, and then the colors of the wildflowers had painted on the interior of the garment that classic image that we know of Our Lady of Guadalupe in full color, right?
Yeah.
That's the miracle that had occurred.
Wow.
So we saw the garment, it's called the tilma. Then we went into the basilica itself. Over the louds, I'm taking photos. It's what I do, right? Document everything, right? Right. Suzanne's drinking it in.
I have to have proof.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. Got to take it home with me, right?
Yeah.
I got to collect it. So, and then over the loudspeaker comes Amazing Grace, sung by an international children's choir. As beautiful can be, right? Wow. So I remarked to Suzanne, isn't that beautiful? I keep taking photos. Literally, next second, I feel her full body weight falling against me. She was fainting. So I put the camera away. I hustled her outside of the basilica, and I thought something was wrong medically. I said, "What's going on? You okay?" And she said, literally, what she said, in that moment when I heard that children's choir singing Amazing Grace, she said, in that moment, I was feeling all the joy and all the pain of all the world.
Wow. Ooh, literally. That just gave me chills.
Yes,
wow.
It gave me chills, and it's stayed in this chip ever since then. This was years ago, right? Mm-hmm. So then let me fast forward. So we go on this whole journey. She gets diagnosed, I get diagnosed, I get diagnosed, she gets diagnosed. I've got to make a decision now to go to Mexico to this treatment clinic. And I knew they had what I needed there. Part of the tragedy is they had to, and they just had to, because of COVID restrictions, they could only take so many patients at that point in time. So I had a date of December 9th when I had to be resident in that facility in Tijuana. Here's Suzanne, literally this room I'm in adjoins to our bedroom. She's dying at home. She was in hospice by that time. And I had to make the decision with her approval to literally leave her here in hospice, knowing she was going to die, to go to Mexico, to access services that weren't available here in the US that could potentially save my life. And that's what I did. It was the single hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. It's like a story unto itself. And in 3 days, so I get down there December 9th. She's home here in hospice with family, nursing around the clock. She dies 3 days later, December 12th, she dies. Okay.
Wow.
Nina, here's the way this stuff, all spiritual basis, how it all circles back on each other. And it's all what I like to call part of what I now believe to be part of a divine tapestry. I'm in the hospital in Mexico. It was a 21-day alternative treatment regimen. My sister flew in from Florida to be my caretaker. So she was with me, like dormitory style. We had 2 beds in the same room. I'm being treated, 24/7, all kinds of amazing breakthrough treatments. 4 days after she passes, the 16th, day after my birthday, I'm laying in the bed in Mexico. A nurse comes in late at night to administer to me. She's leaning over me and I see her name tag says Lupita. And I said, oh, that's really beautiful. I said, what is it based upon? Is it short for something? She said, well, it's a diminutive version of Lupe or Guadalupe. And of course, that gets my attention. I said, oh, my wife, she just passed. She loved Our Lady of Guadalupe. This nurse says to me, do you realize we just had the feast day of Our Lady of Guadalupe? And I said, no. And she says, it was 4 days ago. It was the day my wife died.
Oh, my God.
Suzanne died at 8:58 p.m. on December 12th, the one day out of 365 that celebrates Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Wow.
My sister knew the backstory. We just looked at each other in that hospital room and marveled.
Oh, I just got chills again. When you think about this story and the connections, and in so many ways, we're so all, we have the weaves of being woven together. It's not as, some people think, oh, that was just a coincidence or that was an accident, etc. And what you're seeing is these little minor miracles of, wow, the fact that you guys had this experience. She was very faith-based. She felt that energy, that spiritual energy. I think that was a really wonderful sign for her to say to you, you know what, I'm here. Because I really do believe this. I don't know how you feel completely about this, but I do feel that our bodies might have left, but that's about it. You know what I'm saying? It's like we can commune with our loved ones, and they do. They're at the very least in our hearts, and it sounds like she had a really strong divine connection and calling, which is, I always think of, why do people get together? I'm opposite of my guy as well. He's very analytical. I'm much more energy spiritually based, right? You are extremely, like you said, the research, I'm going to get the numbers, I got to get the facts, and I'm going to, and I'm a fighter. It's like, I'm going to will my way. And you got with somebody that actually said, you know what, I'm going to put it into God's hands. And these little miracles, as I call them, are little highlights that kind of come into your life that say, wait a minute, how do you explain that, what you just shared with me? I mean, that's a huge connection right there. That had to give you the energy to keep going, because here's the thing. There are some people, Mark, thank God you had that fighting capability, because you know how so many people would just crumble and say, okay, game over, I'm done. And so how did you reconcile everything that was going on in the own fight of your life, being away from your wife to have her pass, and then here you are in this hospital? How did you do it?
Well, the the truth of the matter is, so I was diagnosed in July. Literally, the first and only meeting I had with the oncologist that they assigned to me here in Southern California. I get into the meeting. My wife's there. She was still healthy at that point. She hadn't been, diagnosed. And the oncologist walks in. She's late to the meeting, right? I'm a businessman for 40 years. You don't want to be late, especially when life and death is, on
Yeah.
the table, right? Like,
Yeah.
stakes are fairly high here. I'm
Yeah,
not
it's not
selling.
like burning off a mole or something like that, that
Yeah,
you're a little
yeah,
late. You're talking, you already have an anxiousness about meeting with this doctor, let alone when they're late. You're like, oh my gosh, Yeah.
big time. Exactly. So she comes in, she sits down, and she crosses her arms and legs. And anybody who knows body language knows that's not going to be an open-minded discussion that you're going to engage in, right?
Yeah.
So I tried to, by this point, I had studied a lot and I learned a lot about alternative treatments, including things like cannabis, how cannabis is being used. And I was never a drug person my entire life. I never smoked a joint. I never touched a cigarette, literally, right? I was exploring cannabis. So I attempted to engage the oncologist, who was very well respected, in a discussion. What about cannabis? What about immunotherapy? This, that. I kid you not. And maybe she was having a bad day, but that shouldn't matter in the meeting with me, who potentially is dying. She literally waves her hand. I kid you not. She says, "Oh," she says, "if you want to engage in quack theories from the internet, so be it." She says, "We know what works: radiation, chemotherapy, and surgery."
Whoa.
Nina, it was all I could do not to really go off. But what happened was, that was the point of demarcation. That was the point where I knew there was probably, and this is a very reputable, big medical establishment I'm talking about. I knew at that point there was probably nothing here for me in the U.S. And sure enough, all of our subsequent research, we spoke to some of the best of the best. We were getting the same story. They were all offering me that same toxic treatment regimen, right? So I reconciled that fairly early in my personal cancer journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, again, being a researcher, right? I kid you not. I had spoken to people by that point. I was on the phone 24/7. You know how I am. I was like a dog with a bone. I read every book, Chris Beats Cancer, Cancer Outside of the Box by Ty Bollinger, How Not to Die. There's some amazing books out there. So I learned a lot by that point and spoke to a lot of folks. And one thing I did, the only thing I did in the US before this is before Suzanne was diagnosed and before I went to Mexico, I did a high dosage nightly liquid form and capsule cannabis protocol, which is a whole story into itself. There's a woman in Northern California who developed this. She's treated thousands of cancer patients with an 80+% remission rate. So that's the one thing I did in the U.S. So I was barreling down that path. So once I got to Mexico, God's honest truth, I was mad, right? My mom died 32 years ago in my arms, crippled and bald from chemotherapy. My wife's dying at home, literally, as I'm arriving in Mexico. It's trying to take me. And I said to the doctors in Mexico, I'm meeting these people for the first time. I said, have at me. I said, I want to be the poster child for the efficacy of what you're doing here. I believe what you're doing is the path that should be taken in the U.S.
Oh my gosh, you're giving me goosebumps again with what you're saying.
Right? Alternative, holistic, non-toxic, full body, taking into account within 48 hours of arriving at Chipsa Hospital in Mexico, I told my sister, she thought I was crazy. She said, "You're effing nuts." I won't say the word, to say what you're saying. I told her, I said, I'm going home healthy. I didn't know what that definition of healthy would be by that point. I'm going home healthy, strong, and angry. I'm angry. It took my mom. It's taken my wife. It's trying to take me. I said, it's not going to have me. And one of the key reasons, and this is like a wraparound to this whole journey, that I felt that way once I got down there, there was a level of empathy, humanity, and hope that we saw in the practitioners, the staff, the administrators, the owners of that hospital, Chipsa Hospital, that we weren't seeing anywhere with any of these U.S. Medical institutions we were working with. And my belief has become, all these months later, largely in the US, once you get a cancer diagnosis, they first kill you here. They brand you with a death sentence. Oh, you'll probably have 2 to 5 years. In your case, Mark, probably 2 to 3 years, right? So they brand you with a death sentence. So you die here first. And once that goes, you're cooked. Yeah. You're done. And then they administer mostly toxic drugs to you, which kill your immune system. And then that just ensures a quicker demise. Everything they're doing at this clinic in Tijuana, and there are others, they're not the only one, but everything they're doing has two purposes. One is reducing and attempting to eliminate inflammation in your body, because inflammation is the root cause of much chronic illness. Number two, they're rebuilding your immune system, bolstering your immune system. And within days, I began to see the effectiveness of the treatments. So by the end of the 21-day treatment regimen, this is now December 30th, literally almost New Year's Eve, they came to me, and I almost fainted. The doctors came to me and they said, we want you to stay for 2 more weeks. And I said, I can't. My wife just died. We have a memorial. I have to take care of business, right? And they said, well, it's a good reason. They said, I did a PET scan at that point, and they said the PET scan had revealed that my original root tumor, as they call it, in my prostate was now inactive. It wasn't, the root tumor is like the beacon. Yeah. That's, if you will. It. Yep. Yes. So they had, it wasn't gone, but they had at least temporarily neutralized it. So it wasn't nearly as active as it had been. And they wanted to stay on it and keep, pressing. So I talked to my sister. I said, listen, I have to go home now. It's my wife. I said, give me 3 weeks. We came home. My sister spent a week with me to get me acclimated. We had Suzanne's memorial, which was amazing, beautiful, spiritual, on the 17th of January. Then on the 19th, I went back down to Mexico for two more weeks of treatment. And then I subsequently went down in April for 2 additional weeks. So I've had a total of 7 weeks of treatment down there. The thing I want to add to this, if I may, I don't use the word miracle lightly. Suzanne believed in miracles. I was raised Catholic, New York Italian. You were heaven, right? Miracles were, expected. They were taught to us. I always liked to believe that they existed. Suzanne knew they existed. We talked about this every day. We prayed every day together, literally, long before I was diagnosed, long before she was diagnosed. It was a regular prayer ritual. Went on the pilgrimages, the whole 9 yards. She knew miracles were real. In between my last 2 Mexico visits, out of the blue, I get a phone call from my sister. She was now back in Florida. Her son, my nephew, wonderful soul. He's on the autism spectrum. He has Asperger's syndrome, so he still lives with the family. He's in his 30s. And he doesn't say a lot, but when he says something, it's generally pretty meaningful, right? So out of the blue, my sister tells me on the way to the grocery store, he says to her, hey, Mom, he says, didn't Mark and Suzanne go to see a healer last year? And we had. And my sister calls me and tells me this, and she reminded me about this healer. It's a gentleman named Master High. He operates here in Southern California. I had taken Suzanne. We had seen him 3 or 4 times. She was at her worst, but even at her worst, and Suzanne didn't bullshit. She spoke her mind. She was exceedingly honest. She had felt the energy from this man, even as badly compromised as her body was. The next 24 hours, she had some relief of pain, and she had more hope. He was helping her here and here. But then she spiraled so quickly, we just couldn't bring her to see the healer anymore. And then I more or less forgot about the guy. So here's my nephew, autistic, months later. Of all the things I've done a lot of stuff. Right? I'm like, that's a sign. So I immediately text the healer. I said, Master High, can I see you this weekend? He said, yes. So here's the sequence, Nina, and this is the difference between Eastern and Western medicine. And you could largely say spiritual basis versus pure fact scientific basis. You want a juxtaposition of the two, right? Here it is. I go to see this healer on a Sunday. This was back in, I guess, April now, right? He expresses his condolences over Suzanne. This healer, and 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have thought this was voodoo, right? The fact-based guy, right? Yeah, now it's a different world. So he lays you on a table, and he uses two acupuncture needles, but he doesn't puncture you with them. He uses it and he pricks you like in strategic clusters throughout the meridians in your body, the energy flow, the chi meridians in your body, the life force meridians. And he uses some hands-on, light massage, that type of thing. It's very innocuous, right? So he treats me, and then he says, sit up. And he says, let me see your hands. So, I don't know. So I put my hands out like this. He's like, no, this way, right? He wants to read the palm, right? So now he's holding my hands for a long time. Like, okay, he's holding my hands. And then he says, you have a very rare set of hands. I'm like, okay, thank you. Be a hand model. Not sure what that means. And then he says, oh, no. And then the next thing he says, this is true. He says 110. And I thought he meant my weight. I said, no. I said, I'm much closer to 170, 180. And he says, no. He says, life expectancy. He says, you can live to be 110. He says, you will live to be 100. You will be a centenarian. Literally. And then he calls in his coworker, two other patients. They're looking at the hands, all in agreement. So I walk out of there feeling like Jimmy Stewart at the end of It's a Wonderful Life, right? I am lifted. The very next day, I have a phone call appointment with my new oncologist at the same medical institution. He hadn't even seen a bone density scan yet of me, which indicates how brittle your bones might be from the cancer. He was just going off a CAT scan and a bone scan that had been done, which don't really show how brittle the bones are. Just based on that and the track record of prior patients, he literally says to me on the phone, he says, Mark, to be honest, your bones are crumbling. Think of that, right? And if the old me would have curled into a fetal position and said, okay, bring on the drugs, let's do the chemo, right? Let's do what it takes. The only reason I didn't is because what I experienced in Mexico, alternative, and what I was experiencing now with the healer, with Master High. Mm-hmm. So long story short, I've continued to see Master High now for the past 2 to 3 months. And it's remarkable. I've actually never felt better in my life. And I'm sitting here, right, with stage 4 prostate and bone cancer. I'm adhering to the dietary protocols. I'm taking medications that are administered by Shipsa Hospital. I'll probably revisit them for that. I am seeing Master High. I'll call him a faith healer. This man is legitimately channeling life force. And what he attributes it to, he says most chronic illness doesn't require surgery, doesn't require toxic drugs. It requires unblocking energy flow within our body, chi, the movement of chi, life force within our body. And Nina, I am feeling it on a daily basis.
Yay! I love it.
And I point to what's around me. A miracle is happening here. I am convinced now I am being kept alive for a very singular purpose. Well, twofold purpose. One is to give hope, capital H, and that's my line now. I stand for hope. So number one, I actually bought that URL. That's going to be my website. I stand for hope.com.
Wow, that's powerful.
I believe my life is being saved because my purpose here, Suzanne's purpose was in heaven. There was a higher order calling for her. I believe that. Mine apparently is still here. I believe twofold. I'm being healed miraculously. Number one, to give hope to people who were in the position I was in a year ago, my wife was in, and so many people who unfortunately you get terrified, you feel alone, you feel hopeless, and they succumb to the conventional treatments, which largely don't work. So number one, to give hope to people. Number two, my ambition is, and you're aware, I am writing a book that's cataloging all of this. I'm finishing up the manuscript shortly. Hopefully it'll be published this holiday season. And it's going to be called I Love You More, ... Suzanne and Mark, because every time I said I loved you to her, 15 years, she always said I loved you more, right? That's what it's going to be called. So the book's going to be published. And my hope is via the book and perhaps an organization that I'll launch, which I'm calling Things Have Changed. I want to, again, be the poster child for the efficacy of the alternative, spiritual, holistic treatment journey. And I want to raise widespread awareness in the US that these alternatives exist. They're out there. They've largely been kept from being able to operate in the US, but they are out there. And I want people to know that.
I love this because I think we're it happens a lot in this world right now. We're a world divided. Okay. So you have left, right, Western, Eastern, these dichotomies that live very separate. And yet one isn't better or worse than the other. They both prove a function in some cases.
Yes.
But
yes.
Mainly here in the Western world, we've gotten to the point where you have an issue, take a pill.
Yes.
You have an issue, go take a lot of drugs, and
Yes.
hopefully you'll at least calm down the symptom. You won't get to the root of it, and then you'll create another problem and the same thing happens. And we have been told and taught to trust our doctors.
Yes.
But the problem is these doctors are going to medical school, and unless you go to a very innovative medical school, you're being taught drugs, take this and you're going to get better.
You got it.
And yet the other side of that is there's so much healing and preventiveness that can actually happen from the Eastern modalities. For me, and this is just about everything in life, is there has to be this balance of integration.
Yes.
And so when you told me your doctor said those quacky internet theories that what you're looking at is, actually that's not true. I mean, I remember with my cousin, my late cousin, who she had so many issues, and she would go to the doctor and get this pill, and then she'd go to this doctor and get another pill. When she died, she didn't even know all the pills were actually how they were interacting with each other, because those doctors weren't talking to each other. So she might have been taking something for blood pressure, and yet she was taking another pill for kidney issues. And were they really looking at her health plan?
Right.
They weren't. They were saying, here, you're coming to me for your arm or your kidneys. And so I'm just going to treat that.
Yep.
Instead of looking at it more holistically.
Nina, that's exactly it. The other part, when I arrived in that CHIPS hospital in Mexico, I saw that it was genuinely integrative care, fully integrative care, because they do low-level chemo there. They do low-dose chemo, right? Number one, it was integrative. Number two, it was whole body, mind, and spirit. They weren't looking at me as a prostate that had to be radiated or bones that had, right? They looked at me as a human being, as a person, including my sister. We were hugging the doctors and nurses within 40, I'm Italian from New York, within 48 hours of being there. They treated us like family. We were embraced, and not only physically, they brought in spiritual counselors, if you were so inclined that way. They have music that they bring into the equation. And they have a class specifically called Power of the Mind, which is about getting right up here before you can get right down here. So it gets to this, why do you want to live, was the first question they asked me, Mark. With this, second life.
That's a powerful question.
Right. That's the first question, because they want you to have a metric. They want you to have a measurable goal. Well, I want to live because I want to see my grandkids again, whatever it might be. That gives you a purpose. It gives you something to strive for, and then to measure your progress against. So once I saw that, and again, it was completely, it was significantly more robust than any treatment regimen I had seen here, which was pill-based, radiation-based, and surgery-based, bottom line.
So let me ask you a question, because this is really, your story is probably a lot of people have been faced with this dilemma, not only in the United States, but the world.
Yes.
And so we don't want to not trust our doctors. And yet this limited view is really not about health. It becomes about money.
Yeah.
So why aren't we changing? Because you started out saying, who would think that I'm going down to Tijuana, Mexico, right across the border of Southern California, and I'm getting some of the best alternative medicine out there. And here we are in Los Angeles, one of the biggest parts of the world that are innovative in its health regime, of healers, of all this that's around us. And yet you have an oncologist saying, oh, you're going to look at those quack theories. So what's going on here that we're not listening and really opening up our minds and our science to other possibilities?
Well, I was never a conspiracy theory person. I wasn't. You know how hard it is to keep a secret. Once you and I know the secret, chances are good it's going to get out. It's only a secret if right? It always seemed beyond the pale that governments, large organizations, corporations could have so many people participating in a cover-up, in a secret, in something that was against the public interest. But I have to tell you, the past year, and again, I'm a guy who digs in, right? I have learned a lot, and I have to say I don't know how to put it best. There is a dark underbelly to this whole situation, and the reality is this, and some of this is included in the book. For the better part of the past 100 years, since the advent of chemotherapy, which came from mustard gas in World War I, incidentally, it was a chemical weapon.
Wow.
Yeah, they used to put it in artillery shells, exploded high in the atmosphere, and then rain down death. Hitler was a foot soldier in World War I.
Yeah.
His World War I ended. He was blinded by mustard gas, a mustard gas attack.
Wow, I didn't know.
Literally.
Wow.
And then following the war, they had nothing else to kill. The war was over. They looked for something else to kill, and they accidentally hit on the fact that before people died from the administration of the chemotherapy, it was stopping cell division in their body. And then they put two and two together and said, cancer is cell division out of control. Chemo suppresses that. So it virtually overnight, with very rich financial interests here in the US, it became the standard because money changed hands in every medical school in the nation. And that drug-based toxic standard has remained for the better part of the past literally 70, 80, 90 years. And as a result, my impression is, and I don't know the numbers exactly on this, but I would make a pretty good guess that chemotherapy is probably the largest business in the world. I think it's I think it's significantly larger than whole international corporations. So there's a lot to defend there. And I think what happens is they defend it by anytime an alternative, holistic, natural treatment comes. And, there are some brilliant ones that have been attempted to be introduced over the years. They are ostracized, marginalized, litigated, and in some cases criminalized, or worse, from being able to operate. The clinic that I go to in Mexico, they used to have a branch in the US. They got kicked out. Almost all of these clinics, there are some in the Bahamas, Germany, Denmark, the Scandinavian countries are Mexico has a whole bunch of them. They're there because they can't legally operate in the US. And I think, again, let's go conspiracy theory. I think this is real. It's been a very well executed plan to ensure that any natural treatment that comes along, and think about it inherently, most of these more natural treatments, they're using ingredients that are readily accessible in nature. And
of course, it's it speaks to what we're dealing with right now about how do we deal with the COVID treatments, right? There's a lot of other treatments besides just taking a vaccine. Yes. Why can't they all be part of the treatment? In some cases they are, but largely it's no. Again, going back to, you take one thing and one thing only, and that's a drug, and you got to put some unknown thing into your body, whether you believe it or not. That's not the case. But the thing is whether or not, isn't there, why, if you believe in this and it works, who cares if people want to do some natural stuff in regards to their cancer treatment? Why kick them out? There's got to be a, like you said, an underbelly of a reason. Is it because it's a threat? Because if more people are getting well versus more people dying, this is, I've heard this, and see, a lot more about cancer treatments than I do because of all your research that you've done. But the one thing that I've heard over and over and over again is they could prevent cancer, or at least treat it to where it is, you aren't dying tomorrow. They just don't want to. I've heard that. What do you say to that?
Well, I honestly think, again, being a former market researcher, that if cancer were literally cured, prevented entirely, I think it would make a sizable dent in the U.S. economy.
Wow.
Literally almost on the level of what a COVID did when the economy shut down for a period of time. It's a massive infrastructure. The drug, pharmaceutical, big pharma, chemo infrastructure is a massive financial windfall on a regular basis, and it's repeatable income. The more people you get, I hate to go down that path, but it's the reality. There's frankly, it's a disincentive to find a cure just from an economic standpoint.
Well, and I think the thing is here is, and I think this is your message, is that you've got this one level of thinking, and then you've got this whole other world over here that
Right.
is helping and healing and
Yes.
miracles. And you are one of those miracles. Today, you are a walking miracle, which is great. And it gives you a lot of ability to not only write your book, but also to get this message out here that not only is there hope with other treatments, but also I think it's a wake-up call. I'd like this to be a wake-up call for not just America, but for the world, because we are being told a lot of lies in the world right now, not just in cancer treatments, in the world.
Yes.
And there is a lot of level of frustration in the world right now that even 10 years ago, if you told me a little lie, oh, well, that's just a conspiracy theory, or this is that, or,
Right.
whatever it is, you kind of went, oh, that's just politics or whatever.
Right.
Now, I don't know about you, but I'm going, wow, well, if this isn't true, then what else isn't true? And so I think a lot of people are opening up to that possibility that this could be. And man, if that dam opens and you start seeing behind that wizard curtain,
Yeah.
holy moly. And here's the thing, you being this individual that did go on a fact-finding mission, did look at, and I'm sure there's wonderful doctors here in America that are actually more integrated. So I don't want to act like all doctors in America are the one that you experienced. However, with that said, the mindset traditionally is you go and you get chemotherapy or whatever drug that they're offering. They're not looking at the root and the why and the holistic, which a lot of Eastern philosophy and Eastern medicine and healing actually says, look at all of it. And they're saying, just by the nature of what they do, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater and say all Eastern or all Western.
Yes.
Both are needed at certain times, but know what's needed and what isn't. And you know what? If I can't patent this drug, then guess what? Oh, that's horrible. And the problem that we have, and this is more connected the dots, is you have these large media companies. As you know, we both have been in media as well. Me on the other side as an advertising executive, taking all those pharmaceutical drug company money. It's a lot of money that these companies make. And guess what? They will be told through the media that this is wrong and this is bad. And us as the American public are being told, in some cases, not all cases, but a lot of times, a big fat lie. And so it's a money exchange.
It's true. And like, here's a perfect example of the coming together of the two worlds that you're alluding to, a good example of integrative therapy. I get down to Mexico several days in, my body's responding so well. The doctor approached me and she said, we'd like to add chemotherapy into your regimen. And I said, that's why I left the US. I didn't want the chemotherapy, right? She says, no. She says, we do it differently here. She says, whatever that 100% dose is that you get in the US, at this particular clinic I went to, CHIPSA, they do 20 to 25% or less of that dosage, that maximum dosage. And very creatively, they call it insulin potentiated therapy, IPT. They combine the low dose chemo with insulin, because cancer cells love glucose. They love sugar. Cancer cells take in sugar at 20 times the rate of a healthy cell. So the cancer cell sees the blob of, so to speak, of insulin coming at it, chomps it, and then there's a little chemo bomb in there, if you will. It's like a Trojan.
Wow.
It's like a
it's
low
like a
dose
Trojan virus.
It is. It's a Trojan horse approach. Yeah, it's low. So the side effects are absolutely minimal. No throwing up. No vomiting. None of that,
Why aren't we
literally.
doing that here?
I asked you that question. Yeah, because,
I mean, come on. It's all around us. You're a walking example of this. Why not both? Why not both? Give people
it,
options.
one example of the economics of this, back to that part of it, right? Which again is at the root of most evils, right? Um, there's a drug in the US called Provenge, Provenge. It was FDA approved a number of years ago. 3 dosages of it, which is a full course of treatment, costs between, in the US, costs between $90,000 and $120,000. Which means, of course, you can only take it if insurance covers the bulk of it. Otherwise, you're going to bankrupt yourself.
Yeah.
I'm essentially getting in Tijuana that same regimen for under $10,000.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
The same treatment,
Okay.
the same underlying basis. So I always knew there was a cost differential between here in Mexico, here in Bogota. I didn't know it was like this. It's literally, in some cases, 10, 20, 50 to 1 because of the way
Wow.
the economics work here in the US, where you have a major insurance carrier involved, and you have these intermediaries, and you have the detailing organizations that the pharma companies use to call on the doctors. And all this money has to change hands. But so by the time the drug gets to me, it's in the stratosphere price wise. In these other countries, you don't have all those intermediaries. You don't have the bureaucracy and the red tape we have here. So they have a freedom, number one, to think more holistically than our U.S. medical establishment does. Number one, and number two, they have the ability to get it to the patient at extraordinarily lower cost basis than we're experiencing here in the U.S. Now, my insurance doesn't cover what I did in Mexico. That's for certain. It's all out of pocket, but it's a fraction of what those same services would cost.
Well, and also if you're looking at 120 grand and they pay, up to 80-90%, you're still doing out of pocket, so it's not everything
Right.
is being covered. So you still
Correct.
have some out of pocket costs, right? And
That's
so
right.
it's a really, I'm thinking about, what is this journey going to be about for you? Because you're writing a book and you're thinking the book's going to be out in December for the holidays, right? So you almost done with it. Okay.
Yeah, if I'm able to complete the manuscript in the next 2 to 4 weeks, there's a high likelihood it'll be available this year. Yeah.
There is something that's coming forward for me with you, and I don't know how it feels for you or resonates, but there might be something there in terms of bringing this to the forefront so that people like yourself, because you're probably not alone.
No.
So then you think to yourself, okay, we the people, you hear this in the United States.
Right.
And I think we've been pretty complacent for a very, very long time. And there's a lot of different areas in this, and healthcare is certainly one of them.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if your journey is not only going to give people hope, but you can also affect huge, huge change that needs to happen. Because in order to have hope, you have to have healing options. And that not only starts right here, what you just said in terms of your mind, but then what are you going to do in terms of healing your body, not damaging your body on the way to trying to stop something?
Right.
That doesn't ever get to the root cause of anything.
No, it doesn't. You're right. There were points in history, and look it up. It's true. It's factual. There was a point in history where surgeons wouldn't wash their smocks after an operation. They looked at the blood and the guts as a badge of honor. They'd use the same smock over and over. They didn't know about bacteria. They didn't know about microbial, that type of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they would wear those smocks over and over again, probably infect, right? So, but that was the standard. And when someone came along and thought differently about that and said, no, there's bacteria, they got ostracized for decades. So if that was the medical standard of care at a point in time, why should I completely trust what's being brought to me now as that standard of care, right? Number one.
Great point.
Number two, here's another thing that I've connected these dots recently, right? Because healthcare in the US is incredibly expensive, and in a lot of cases, people don't even have the insurance coverage. What does that do? it creates a scenario where they only go to the doctor when they're sick already. And when you go to the doctor and you're sick, you're vulnerable. And you know that doctor knows a lot more than you do. And you're already intimidated. So you're scared, you're sick, and you're vulnerable. You're at your worst. And it's then that you're being asked to make life-altering decisions about your body. Think of that set of circumstances. And as good as doctors are, there's amazing US doctors. There's no question. Amazing, right? But just think about it. If they see 100 people in a month, 100 patients, I'm one of those 100. They get 99 of those right. They get one wrong, who is me. They were wrong 100% of the time as it relates to me.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's the mindset. There's a big message here that, to your point, don't be complacent. Take control of your health care. Consider all the options. Open the viewfinder way up. Don't take as gospel what you're hearing from that one oncologist, that one urologist. Solicit multiple opinions, look at different treatment modalities, then make your own educated decision what you want to do. And frankly, that's where I'm going with this. To your other point, my hope is that beyond the book, perhaps there will be an organization, there will be a movement called Things Have Changed. And that movement would be about two things: raising widespread awareness that an alternative path does exist, and that it's been largely kept from us in the US. That's why that path is the path less traveled. And number two, to push for choice in that regard. And ultimately, Nina, what I believe has to happen is, think of how money changes hands, right? Your doctor largely is only going to prescribe you what he or she knows the insurance company is going to cover, right? So your healthcare is largely being dictated to you by the insurance provider. Ultimately, if you think about it, go back. So I think ultimately, for alternative healing to be accessible and available to people, I think that we're going to need an insurance company.
I love it. Oh my God, that's a great idea. And let me tell you, you're going to get the boatloads of people, because the people are actually already there. There's so many people that have woken up to what you're saying. Yes. They just don't know how to actually affect and really create the change.
Yes.
People like yourself that are out there in the world saying, look at me. I'm a walking example. I could have been on my deathbed, or even worse, passed away by now. But guess what? I'm not. I'm still kicking. And you know why I'm still kicking? Is because I looked at other modalities. It's not one size fits all. And the thing is, preventative is better. But then the question becomes, pharmaceutical companies and everybody that benefits from those pharmaceutical companies have to look at the value system of what you say. Do you really want to get well, or do you want to treat a symptom to keep making money?
Yes.
And that's the big question for all of us. But I will say this: we, the people, if they believe we want to get well, will, just like what happened with the doctors that were wearing the same, scrubs, time after time after time, then they came along and affected that change. Maybe that's going to be a little bit of that. No, we can't do it. It's already happening. But I'm telling you, there's more and more people like yourself saying, and there's more and more integrated doctors saying, no, I want to treat the whole patient. So whether we're here in the United States, we're down in Mexico, Germany, the Bahamas, wherever it is, more and more of us have to wake up and command, I like to say demand, but command a change. And slowly but slowly, things will start to change. And pretty soon, 20 years from now, hopefully sooner than that, maybe 3 years from now, maybe 3 months from now, all of a sudden, we will start to see more of the acupunctures, the modality and the treatments that you're talking about in terms of cancer, so that everything is needed in terms of, like you said, the low dose of chemo.
Yes.
But do it well. Don't do it where you kill one thing, but then you kill 80% of your body that's actually trying to fight off disease in general. It doesn't make a lot of sense, right?
No, it doesn't. Yeah, you're exactly right.
So Mark, and kind of finishing up here, what would be your takeaway message for people that, you've said a lot here. There's so many good pearls of wisdom, but, one of them is hope. Is there anything else that you would like to leave us in terms of thinking about this issue?
Predominantly, it is a combination of, when you're faced, and, not just cancer, any manner of life-threatening situation, but for most of us, it's cancer. Almost everyone who's ever died in my family has died of cancer,
Mm.
literally over the years, and many of them were chemoed, right? The first part is don't, because again, when you get that diagnosis, you're terrified, you feel alone, you feel hopeless. A big part of my message is don't go with the terror. Don't lapse into that. Don't let that overwhelm you like a tsunami. You're not alone. You're far from being alone. Trust me. And there is hope. There is hope. There is hope. So and as I've learned at the back end of this journey, literally just over the past few weeks, and I'm gonna give you a quote. I have it here on my phone.
Oh, good. I was going to ask you for one. So
yeah, it's a brief one, and it came from my faith healer, my energy healer. He says, this is so true. He says, quote unquote, learning to ignore things is one of the great paths to inner peace. And it's true, because on the journey I'm on right now, I've got the conventional Western medical that I did for the first, 59 years of my life, which is telling me a certain thing and giving me a certain set of metrics. And if I got caught up in those metrics, if I got caught up in those numbers, so to speak, using my market research, I would have gone down a materially different path than the one I've gone down. So part of what I'm doing is I'm ignoring those numbers. I am literally, for the first time in my life, the market researcher is ignoring those numbers. And you know what I'm going with? Suzanne always said to our grandkids, we had 10 grandkids by the time she passed.
Wow.
She always said, whenever you're faced with drugs, sex, whatever the temptation is, whatever the other kids are doing, she said, don't think here. She said, use this. She says, use this. She says, that in your inner voice, she always said, is your conscience. She said, that's where the divine comes in.
Aww.
She was so right. And at every aspect of my own personal journey, especially now, that's what I'm doing. I'm trusting this inside, that inner voice. And that quote speaks directly to that. There are some things in life, and you were saying we get bombarded with so much. There's a lot of chatter, a lot of distractions, a lot of diversions. Man, put a filter on, redirect towards hope, positivity, and potential, and away from doom, gloom, and hopelessness, which frankly is largely what our U.S. drug architecture is built around. So that would be my.
And you said about your energy person as well, your energy healer. Think about it. This is science too. Energy follows thought. So if we expand, our thoughts expand our energy. So if we are mainly energy human beings, guess what? What we think and how we feel about what we think is really key. So if we're doom gloom, what you just said, or we're thinking more hope and positivity, guess which one is going to get us to that place that could actually transform not just our minds, but our bodies too. And that's where the integration of what you're talking about needs to happen.
Yes.
You can't just say, guess what? Take a pill. It will all be better.
Yes. No, you're
those days are gone. That ship has sailed.
Yeah, it has.
It's time for a new day, Mark. Anything I can do to support your mission, your work out in the world. I know that this has been a monumental year for you in terms of change, awareness, opening up, adventure, grief, love, soulfulness, research, all of it. And you have done such a remarkable job and such an inspiration, not only to me, but everybody that either is watching or listening to this right now. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
You're bringing tears to my eyes of joy, and I'm very grateful to you, Nina. You've always been an amazing friend and just a good human being, and I really appreciate this opportunity. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you. And Mark Mallardi, he has a new book coming out at the end of the year, and things have certainly changed. And that's the name of his new organization. And you will hear more from Mark, and you will get a lot of insight. And if you are either struggling with cancer or any kind of health condition, the main message and takeaway is don't be afraid. dive in and look at and research your options. Don't just trust what's being told to you. And also, his main message is of hope. And believe me, if he can do it, anybody can. All right, I'm Nina Bosky, and for Life Bites in this life-inspired segment, remember to take a bite out of life before what? Life takes a bite out of you.